The Arctic wind howls across the frozen tundra, carrying with it temperatures that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. It's February 2024, and you're standing on some of the most remote, unforgiving terrain on Earth, hundreds of miles north of the Arctic Circle in Russia's Yamalo-Nenets region. A team of oil workers operates heavy drilling equipment, their breath forming ice crystals in the air before dissipating into the white void. This is routine work in one of the harshest environments imaginable, but today, routine is about to shatter. The ground-penetrating radar starts behaving strangely. Unusual metal readings appear on the screen, large, deliberate, man-made. The chief engineer, Mikhail Sokolov, stops the drill. In 40 years of Arctic operations, he's seen permafrost hide many things: mammoth bones, abandoned Soviet equipment, even old World War II debris. But this signature is different. It's deep, structured, intentional. The excavation begins carefully. 3 meters down, the first piece of metal emerges from the ice, corroded but unmistakable. It's an aircraft wing, painted in faded Soviet military green, with a red star still barely visible beneath decades of frost. Excitement ripples through the crew. A crash site, probably from the Cold War era. But as they clear more ice, something impossible appears. An entrance. Not wreckage, scattered randomly, but a deliberate opening carved into the permafrost, reinforced with metal supports. Someone built this. Someone went underground. Mikhail's radio crackles to life. He reports the discovery to headquarters, his voice uncertain. The enthusiasm from moments ago has transformed into something else, a creeping unease, because this isn't just a crash site. This is something someone tried very hard to hide. The descent into the bunker feels like traveling backward through time. Mikhail and 3 crew members clip safety lines to the entrance supports and lower themselves into the darkness, their headlamps cutting through air that hasn't circulated in 7 decades. The temperature inside is somehow even colder than the surface, as if the permafrost has preserved not just the structure, but the very essence of 1953. 5 meters down, the narrow shaft opens into a chamber, and what you see stops you cold. The bunker is pristine, perfectly preserved. A Soviet military radio set sits on a makeshift table constructed from aircraft aluminum, its dials and switches frozen mid-adjustment. Detailed maps of the Arctic region are pinned to ice walls, marked with penciled notations in Cyrillic script. Navigation charts, weather instruments, emergency flares, still in their cases, everything exactly where it was left. There's no chaos here, no desperate destruction. Everything is methodical, organized, intentional. Your eyes adjust to the dim space, and the details multiply. Tin cans stacked neatly in a corner, labels still legible. Soviet military rations dated 1953. A kerosene lamp. Logbooks bound in leather, their pages filled with handwritten entries. And there, hanging from a metal hook driven into the frozen wall, a pilot's leather jacket thick, lined with fur, the kind issued to Soviet Air Force officers flying Arctic missions. The jacket sways slightly in the air current from the entrance shaft, creating the unsettling illusion of recent occupation. Mikhail approaches the logbooks with trembling hands. The first page opens to reveal precise, disciplined handwriting. A name, a date, the 15th of March 1953. He reads the first entry aloud, his voice barely a whisper, and the realization hits. Someone survived the crash. Someone lived here. And somewhere in this frozen tomb, their story is waiting. The bunker extends deeper than anyone expected. Beyond the main chamber, a narrow passage leads further into the permafrost, and Mikhail's headlamp reveals another space smaller, more intimate, like a final refuge. He squeezes through the opening, and his light falls upon something that makes his breath catch in his throat. Slumped against the far wall, legs extended, head tilted slightly forward, is a human skeleton still clothed in a Soviet Air Force uniform. The fabric is remarkably preserved, the deep blue-gray wool showing minimal decay in the Arctic's natural freezer. Brass buttons still gleam dully in the lamplight. On the chest, military insignia remain visible, the wings of a pilot, ribbons from the Great Patriotic War. The skeleton's gloved hands rest in its lap, one still loosely holding a pen, the other placed atop a leather journal. The posture suggests someone who simply sat down, wrote final words, and never stood again. It's peaceful in a way that makes the discovery even more haunting. Around the remains, more evidence of the final days. Empty ration tins, a nearly depleted kerosene lamp, photographs pinned to the ice wall, a woman, a small child, their faces smiling from another lifetime. Mikhail kneels carefully, mindful not to disturb the scene. With gloved fingers, he reaches for the dog tags hanging from the skeletal neck. The metal is cold, the stamped Cyrillic letters still sharp and clear, despite 71 years of Arctic darkness. He reads the name aloud. Captain Dmitry Volkov, Soviet Air Force. Birth date, 1919. Blood type, service number. This isn't just remains. This is a man with a name, a history, a family somewhere who buried an empty coffin and never knew the truth. For 7 decades, while the world changed beyond recognition, Dmitry Volkov waited here in the silent dark. To understand how Captain Dmitry Volkov ended up frozen in an Arctic bunker, you have to understand the world he lived in, a world balanced on the knife edge of nuclear annihilation. March 1953 marks one of the most volatile moments in Cold War history. Joseph Stalin, the iron-fisted dictator who ruled the Soviet Union for nearly 3 decades, has just died. The power vacuum in Moscow is immediate and dangerous. Rival factions within the Communist Party circle each other like wolves, each vying for control of the world's largest nation and its growing nuclear arsenal. The entire Soviet system teeters on uncertainty, and in that uncertainty, military operations intensify. The Arctic becomes a critical theater of this invisible war. NATO forces and Soviet strategists understand that the polar region offers the shortest route for bombers carrying nuclear payloads. The frozen expanse above the Arctic Circle transforms into a chessboard where both sides maneuver for advantage. Soviet military installations multiply across the northern territories, radar stations, airfields, weather monitoring posts, all officially civilian, all serving military purposes. Reconnaissance missions probe the ice for weaknesses, chart potential invasion routes, photograph American and Canadian installations from international airspace. The work is classified, dangerous, and absolutely vital. Captain Dmitry Volkov, a decorated combat pilot who survived the Nazi invasion and the brutal siege of Stalingrad, receives his orders in early March 1953. The assignment is classified as weather reconnaissance, official cover for missions that photograph NATO positions, monitor radio frequencies, and map Soviet defensive capabilities across the polar region. These flights push aircraft to their limits, operating in temperatures where fuel thickens, instruments fail, and a single mechanical problem hundreds of miles from base means certain death. Volkov knows the risks. Every Arctic pilot does. But orders are orders, especially in Stalin's Soviet Union. You fly, or you face questions about your loyalty. The 15th of March, 1953. The sun barely crests the horizon at the classified Soviet airbase designated Polar Station 7, a collection of military buildings and a single ice runway carved into the tundra. Captain Dmitry Volkov performs his pre-flight checks on a modified Ilyushin Il-12 transport aircraft, its twin engines already warming in the brutal cold. The Il-12 wasn't designed for this. It's a workhorse transport plane adapted for Arctic reconnaissance with additional fuel tanks, reinforced heating systems, and camera equipment hidden behind civilian weather monitoring gear. Volkov has flown this route before, always alone, always under orders that are briefed verbally and never written down. His mission parameters are deceptively simple. Fly north along the ice shelf, photograph specific coordinates marked on charts he'll destroy before landing, monitor radio frequencies for NATO transmissions, return in 6 hours. The route takes him over some of the most desolate territory on Earth, endless white broken only by pressure ridges and occasional Polynesias where dark water shows through the ice. He carries survival gear, emergency rations for 2 weeks, flares, and a sidearm. Standard protocol. At 0600 hours, Volkov's Il-12 lifts off from the ice runway, banking north into the pale Arctic dawn. For the first 3 hours, everything proceeds according to plan. Volkov maintains altitude at 3,000 meters, the aircraft handling well despite temperatures hovering around -40 degrees Celsius. He photographs the designated areas, notes ice conditions in his logbook, maintains sporadic radio contact with Polar Station 7. The vast emptiness below remains unchanged, white upon white, stretching to infinity. At 0900 hours, he reaches his northernmost waypoint and begins the turn south toward base. Expected landing time, 1,200 hours. He'll file his report, hand over the camera film, sleep for 12 hours, and do it again next week. Routine. But the Arctic doesn't respect routine. The weather changes with terrifying speed. One moment, Volkov is flying through clear air with unlimited visibility. The next, the northern horizon darkens like a bruise spreading across the sky. Arctic blizzards are notorious for their sudden violence, forming from atmospheric conditions that meteorologists in 1953 barely understand and certainly cannot predict with any accuracy. Volkov sees it coming, a wall of white moving toward him faster than his aircraft can fly. He immediately radios Polar Station 7, his voice calm despite the knot forming in his stomach. Station 7, this is Volkov. Severe weather system approaching from northwest. Attempting to outrun. Maintaining current heading. The response crackles back through heavy static. Acknowledged. Expedite return. Weather conditions at base deteriorating rapidly. But Volkov already knows he won't make it. The storm overtakes him like a living thing, engulfing the Il-12 inches, a white chaos that eliminates all sense of up, down, forward, or back. Visibility drops to 0. The aircraft lurches violently as winds exceed 100 kilometers per hour, tossing the heavy transport like a toy. Ice begins forming on the wings, adding weight, disrupting airflow, pulling the plane downward. Volkov fights the controls, every muscle straining, relying purely on instruments now because the windscreen shows nothing but swirling white. Radio contact becomes sporadic, bursts of static punctuated by fragments of transmission. Station 7, experiencing severe turbulence. Losing altitude. Volkov's voice remains professional even as the altimeter spins downward. 2,500 meters, 2,000, 1,500. The engines scream. Metal groans. Warning lights illuminate across the instrument panel. He transmits one final time, forcing the words through gritted teeth. Experiencing severe turbulence, losing altitude. Last known position. The sentence never finishes. At Polar Station 7, operators hear only static, then silence. They call Volkov's designation repeatedly, their voices growing more urgent. No response. The Arctic has swallowed another aircraft whole, and in Stalin's Soviet Union, some disappearances are simply classified and forgotten. The search operation launches within hours of Volkov's disappearance, but it's hampered from the start by the same storm that brought him down. 2 Il-12 seconds equipped with search cameras manage brief flights over his last known coordinates, their crews scanning endless white for any sign of wreckage, any dark anomaly against the snow. They see nothing. The blizzard has erased everything, smoothing the landscape into featureless uniformity. Ground teams are impossible. The weather conditions would kill anyone attempting overland travel. After 48 hours, the operation simply stops. Not because hope is lost, but because orders come down from Moscow. Classify the mission, bury the records, move on. The decision is coldly pragmatic. Stalin may be dead, but the machinery of Soviet secrecy grinds on. Volkov was flying a classified reconnaissance mission over territory the USSR officially doesn't monitor. Acknowledging his disappearance means acknowledging the mission, which means revealing operational capabilities to potential NATO intelligence. Better to make it all vanish. The official record is typed on thin paper and filed in a locked cabinet. Captain Dmitry Volkov, lost in routine training accident, the 15th of March 1953, body unrecoverable due to Arctic conditions. No mention of the actual mission, no details about location, nothing that might prompt uncomfortable questions. At Polar Station 7, the base commander calls a briefing. The dozen personnel who knew about Volkov's mission sit in uncomfortable silence as they're told what will happen next. The flight never occurred. Volkov died in a training exercise. Anyone discussing the true circumstances will face charges of revealing state secrets, charges that in 1953 often carry a death sentence or decades in the Gulag. The men nod. They understand. This is how the Soviet system works. Some truths are too inconvenient to acknowledge. Within a week, new pilots arrive. Operations continue. Volkov becomes a ghost story whispered among Arctic crews, then even that fades. No further investigation is permitted, no additional searches authorized. The Arctic keeps its secrets, and the Soviet military keeps its own. In Moscow, Katya Volkova stands in her small communal apartment, reading the telegram for the 5th time, as if the words might change. The Ministry of Defense regrets to inform you that Captain Dmitry Volkov died the 15th of March 1953, serving the motherland. Further details are classified. Funeral arrangements to follow. Her hands shake. Her daughter, Svetlana, only 4 years old, plays on the floor with wooden blocks, too young to understand that her father isn't coming home. Katya had always known this possibility existed. You don't marry a military pilot without accepting that risk, but knowing and experiencing are different things. The telegram offers no details, no body, no closure, just absence. The days that follow blur into a nightmare of Soviet bureaucracy and forced silence. Katya tries to ask questions. Where exactly did he die? Can she see the crash site? Were there witnesses? But every inquiry meets the same stone wall. The details are classified for national security. Your husband died a hero. That is all you need to know. Other military wives whisper their own experiences, their own disappeared husbands lost to classified missions that officially never happened. This is life in the Soviet system. You accept what you're told, grieve quietly, and don't make trouble. The funeral occurs 3 weeks later with full military honors, a ceremony without a body. An empty coffin draped in the Soviet flag sits before rows of uniformed officers. Medals are presented: the Order of the Red Star, commendations for Arctic service, recognition for his role in the Great Patriotic War. Katya accepts them numbly, while Svetlana clings to her leg, confused by the solemn faces and her mother's tears. The coffin is buried in a Moscow military cemetery, a headstone marking a grave that contains nothing but earth. Dmitry Volkov's name is carved in stone, birth and death dates recorded, but the man himself remains somewhere in the Arctic wasteland. 71 years pass. Katya lives her entire life never knowing what truly happened, dying in 1998 with questions unanswered. Svetlana grows up, marries, has children of her own. She keeps her father's medals in a wooden box, looks at his photograph, a young man in a pilot's uniform, confident smile, eyes that never got to see his daughter grow up. She tells her own children about the grandfather they never met, the hero who died serving his country. But always, beneath the official story, the questions linger. Where exactly did he die? Did he suffer? Could he have been saved? The Soviet Union collapses, archives open, but Volkov's file remains classified, locked away with thousands of other inconvenient truths. Until a drilling crew, hunting for oil in the frozen north, breaks through the ice and discovers what 71 years of silence tried to hide. Back in the frozen bunker, Mikhail and his team carefully examine the evidence Volkov left behind. The logbooks tell a story the Soviet military never wanted revealed, a story of survival against impossible odds. The first entries, written in steady, disciplined handwriting, reconstruct those final, terrifying moments in the sky. Volkov managed what should have been impossible. He brought the crippled Il-12 down in a controlled crash landing on the Arctic ice shelf. Fighting zero visibility, howling winds, and an aircraft heavy with ice, he found a relatively flat expanse and set the plane down hard but intact enough that he walked away from it. The impact shattered the landing gear, buckled the fuselage, and tore off part of the left wing, but the main cabin survived. More critically, so did Volkov. His logbook describes crawling from the cockpit into the blizzard, the wind so violent it knocked him to his knees. The radio equipment was destroyed, crushed in the impact, its components scattered across the ice. No way to call for help. No way to signal his position. The temperature gauge he salvaged from the cockpit read -45 degrees Celsius, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. Through the whiteout, he could see nothing. No landmarks, no indication of where he was beyond hundreds of miles from anywhere. Volkov made a decision that would keep him alive far longer than anyone could have predicted. Rather than wait with the wreckage where exposure would kill him within hours, he began to dig. Using tools from the aircraft's emergency kit and pieces of torn metal, he carved into the permafrost beneath the ice shelf, creating a shelter that would protect him from the wind and trap what little heat his body generated. Over the following days, as the storm raged above, he systematically dismantled parts of the aircraft, dragging components into his expanding underground refuge. Metal panels became walls. The pilot's seat became furniture. Wiring, insulation, anything useful was repurposed. What emerged was the bunker. The oil workers discovered 71 years later, a tomb Volkov built with his own hands. The logbook entries begin on the 16th of March, 1953, one day after the crash. Volkov's handwriting is neat, methodical, the mark of a military officer maintaining discipline even in crisis. Day 1, crash landing successful. Aircraft destroyed but emergency supplies intact. Radio inoperable. Began construction of underground shelter to survive until rescue. Confident search operations are underway. Temperature, -45 degrees Celsius. Rations for 14 days if carefully managed. The words are calm, professional, the words of a man who believes he'll be rescued soon and wants to document his survival for the official report he'll file when he gets home. He describes his routine with meticulous detail. The underground shelter expands daily as he digs deeper into the permafrost, creating a space large enough to move around in, insulated from the killing wind above. He salvages everything from the wreckage, the kerosene lamp for light and heat, weather instruments, maps, the radio set even though it's useless, his leather jacket, photographs of Katya and Svetlana. The emergency rations are carefully divided, 1 small can per day, supplemented with melted ice for water. He sets up a ventilation shaft using aluminum tubing from the aircraft to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning from the lamp. Every action is calculated to extend survival. The early entries radiate hope. Day 5, heard aircraft overhead, unable to signal due to storm conditions. They're searching. They'll find me. But days turn to weeks, and the tone shifts subtly. Day 12. No aircraft today. Storm cleared yesterday, but search planes have not appeared. Rations reduced to half portions to extend supplies. Still confident. By day 20, the handwriting becomes slightly less steady. Day 20. No signs of search operations. Possible they believe I went down in a different location. Must conserve resources. Weather improving, but no aircraft visible. The logbook becomes his companion, his confessor, his only connection to the world beyond the ice. He writes letters to Katya and Svetlana that he knows they'll never receive, describing his love for them, his regret at leaving them alone. He calculates distances, tries to determine if he could walk to safety, concludes it's impossible, hundreds of kilometers in any direction with no guarantee of finding anything but more ice. So he waits. The lamp burns, the rations dwindle, and slowly the reality settles over him like the Arctic darkness. No one is coming. Hope transforms into grim determination, then into something quieter, sadder acceptance. The logbook entries stretch across weeks, then months, each one a window into a man's slow confrontation with his own mortality. Volkov establishes routines because routines keep you sane when the alternative is staring into frozen darkness contemplating your death. He wakes at what he estimates as 0600 hours, though in the Arctic's seasonal darkness, time becomes abstract. He performs calisthenics in the cramped bunker to maintain circulation, rationing his body's warmth as carefully as he rations the food. He writes in the logbook, recording temperature, his physical condition, inventory of remaining supplies. He studies his maps obsessively, calculating and recalculating possible rescue scenarios, plotting where search teams might look, where he went wrong. By April, 2 months after the crash, the entries reveal a pattern that's almost heartbreaking in its repetition. Day 47. Heard aircraft engines this morning, distant but unmistakable. Climbed to surface, attempted to signal with flares. Aircraft passed beyond visual range before I could ignite them. They're still looking. A week later, day 54. Another aircraft, closer this time, set off 2 flares. Don't believe they saw, only 4 flares remaining. Must conserve. The Arctic spring brings longer daylight hours, better weather, increased air traffic, but none of it finds him. The planes he hears might be search aircraft, or they might be routine reconnaissance flights. Other pilots like him photographing ice conditions, completely unaware a man is dying slowly beneath them. May arrives, then June. The entries grow more philosophical, less technical. Volkov writes about his childhood in Ukraine, his first flight, meeting Katya at a Moscow dance in 1945. He describes Svetlana's birth, holding her for the first time, the terror and joy of fatherhood. These aren't the words of a military officer filing a report anymore. These are the words of a man organizing his memories, deciding what matters, what he wants remembered. Day 89. Understand now that search operations have ceased. Either they believe I'm dead, or the mission has been classified and they cannot acknowledge my existence. The Soviet system is efficient in many ways. The realization doesn't come all at once. It's a gradual erosion of hope, like permafrost slowly melting. By July, 4 months after the crash, Volkov writes with brutal clarity. Day 118. No one is coming. Must accept this. Rations nearly exhausted. Kerosene low. Winter approaches again. I will not survive it. And yet he continues. He continues writing, continues his routines, continues the simple act of being alive, because what else is there to do? The bunker that saved his life has become his prison, and the ice shelf his tomb. The logbook reveals something extraordinary. Captain Dmitry Volkov survived for 7 months in that frozen bunker. 7 months of isolation, of cold, of diminishing supplies, and fading hope. By August, the handwriting begins to deteriorate. The neat, disciplined script becomes shaky, harder to read. Entries that once filled pages shrink to a few lines. Day 156. Weakness increasing. Last ration consumed yesterday. Attempted to hunt seal through ice hole. No success. Burning aircraft debris for heat. Kerosene gone. The words sketch a picture of a body slowly shutting down, metabolism slowing, muscle wasting away despite his efforts to stay active. September brings the return of Arctic darkness. The brief summer, such as it was, ends. Temperatures plummet again. Volkov's entries become sporadic, sometimes days pass between them, suggesting he's sleeping more, conserving energy his body no longer has. Day 183. Can barely hold pen. Thoughts drift. Dream of Katya's voice. Svetlana must be starting school soon. Will she remember me? The questions trail off unfinished. Photographs of his family remain pinned to the ice wall, their faces watching over him in the lamplight he can no longer afford to burn. October 1953. 7 months after the crash that should have killed him immediately, Volkov makes his final entry. The handwriting is barely legible, letters wandering across the page, but the words are clear enough. October 12. No strength left. Cold doesn't hurt anymore. Strange mercy in that. If anyone finds this, tell Katya and Svetlana I never stopped thinking of them. Tell them I tried to come home. Tell them. The sentence ends mid-thought. The pen trails off the page. Mikhail reads these final words in the bunker, his headlamp illuminating the page, and looks up at the skeleton slumped against the wall. Volkov's final position tells its own story. He sat down against the ice, placed the journal in his lap, pen in hand, photographs of his family at eye level. He didn't thrash or struggle. He simply sat down, wrote his final words, and let the cold take him. It would have been peaceful. Eventually, hypothermia in its final stages brings a drowsy numbness, almost comfortable. After 7 months of fighting, Dmitry Volkov stopped fighting. The date on that last entry, the 12th of October, 1953, exactly 7 months after the storm that brought him down. 7 months of waiting for rescue that never came, in a bunker the world forgot existed. Within 48 hours of the discovery, the site transforms into something resembling an archaeological excavation. Russian military historians arrive by helicopter, along with forensic specialists, archivists from the Ministry of Defense, and officials who understand the sensitivity of what's been found. The bunker is photographed from every angle, each artifact catalogued and documented before anything is moved. This isn't just a crash site, it's a time capsule from one of the most secretive periods in Soviet history, and everything here is potential evidence of missions the Kremlin never acknowledged. Forensic analysis confirms what the dog tags already revealed. DNA extracted from bone marrow is compared against samples from military records and living relatives. The results are definitive. The remains belong to Captain Dmitry Volkov, missing since the 15th of March 1953, officially declared lost in a training accident. But the bunker's contents tell a very different story. The documents Volkov left behind, maps marked with coordinates, notes about NATO radio frequencies, photographic film still in its canisters, reveal the classified nature of his actual mission. This wasn't weather reconnaissance. This was Cold War espionage, border surveillance, the invisible chess game played above the Arctic Circle while the world teetered on the edge of nuclear war. The military historians examine Volkov's maps with growing astonishment, cross-referencing them against recently declassified Soviet military installations. They overlay his crash coordinates with archival records of Arctic bases from 1953. And then they find it the detail that transforms this story from tragic to devastating. 15 miles southeast of Volkov's bunker, buried in the archives, is a notation for a secret backup airfield designated Emergency Station 12. It was operational in 1953, staffed year-round, equipped with radio, supplies, and aircraft capable of rescue operations. 15 miles. A distance Volkov might have walked in good conditions, might have reached if he'd known it existed, but the installation was classified above his clearance level. His maps didn't show it. His briefing didn't mention it. He died alone in the ice, rationing food, and waiting for rescue, while a fully operational Soviet military base sat just beyond the horizon. The historians stand in the bunker, reading Volkov's final entries about no one coming to save him, and the cruelty of it settles over them like the Arctic cold. He was never truly abandoned. He simply didn't know where to look. The phone call comes to a modest apartment in St. Petersburg on a February morning in 2024. Svetlana Volkova, 73 years old, retired schoolteacher, answers expecting a telemarketer. Instead, she hears, "Mrs. Volkova, this is Colonel Petrov from the Ministry of Defense. It's about your father." For a moment, she can't speak. Her father has been dead for 71 years, buried in an empty grave since before she started school. What could there possibly be to say about him now? But there is everything to say. Colonel Petrov explains gently, carefully, the oil workers, the bunker, the logbook, the remains. He tells her what her father actually did, where he actually died, how long he survived. He tells her about the letters Volkov wrote to her and her mother, letters composed in the darkness, knowing they'd never be sent, but writing them anyway because a man facing death needs to speak to the people he loves. Svetlana listens, tears streaming down her face, as 71 years of questions finally receive answers. The artifacts are brought to her under military escort. Her father's logbook, preserved in archival plastic, the photographs he pinned to ice walls, pictures of her mother, young and beautiful, and of Svetlana herself at age 4, the last image he carried of his daughter. Letters addressed to "My dearest Katya" and "My little Svetlana." Pages filled with love and regret and the small details of life in the bunker. Svetlana reads her father's words and meets him for the first time as an adult, understanding him not as the distant hero from childhood stories, but as a real man who suffered and hoped and loved fiercely until the very end. The state funeral occurs in March 2024, 71 years late, but conducted with all the honors that should have been given in 1953. Captain Dmitry Volkov's remains are transported to Moscow in a flag-draped coffin, this time containing the man himself rather than empty promises. Military aircraft fly overhead in formation. Government officials attend, some offering apologies for the secrecy that killed him, for the system that valued classified missions over human lives. Svetlana stands at the cemetery where her father was supposedly buried in 1953, watching as his actual remains are finally laid to rest beside the marker that stood empty for 7 decades. The grave that held nothing now holds everything: bones, answers, closure. Her mother didn't live to see this day, died never knowing the truth, but Svetlana knows, and in knowing, she can finally let him rest. The bunker remains exactly where Dmitry Volkov built it 71 years ago in the frozen darkness, fighting for survival one day at a time. But now it serves a different purpose. The Russian government has declared it a protected historical site, a monument to the human cost of Cold War secrecy. Visitors who make the difficult journey to this remote corner of the Arctic descend the same entrance shaft the oil workers discovered, walk through the same chambers where Volkov rationed his final meals, and stand before the ice wall where photographs of his family still hang. It's a sobering experience seeing the physical evidence of a man's slow confrontation with death, touching the tools he used to extend his life, reading his handwriting as hope transformed into acceptance. The story raises uncomfortable questions about the machinery of secrecy that defined an era. How many others vanished into classified missions, their families told comforting lies, their fates buried in locked archives? Volkov's survival for 7 months is extraordinary, a testament to his training, his resourcefulness, his sheer determination to stay alive. But his death 15 miles from rescue is a tragedy that didn't have to happen. The same system that sent him on secret missions abandoned him when he needed it most, choosing operational security over human life. It's a calculation made countless times during the Cold War, on both sides of the Iron Curtain, and Volkov's frozen bunker stands as evidence of what that calculation costs. Yet there's something else in this story beyond tragedy. Volkov's logbook reveals a man who faced the worst solitude imaginable and refused to surrender his humanity. He maintained routines, wrote letters to people he'd never see again, documented his survival not out of hope for rescue, but because recording the truth mattered to him. Even knowing he'd die alone in the ice, he wanted his story told. He wanted Katya and Svetlana to know he tried, that he thought of them until the very end, that love persisted even in the Arctic darkness. The Arctic keeps many secrets, bodies, and wreckage and stories, swallowed by ice and snow and bureaucratic silence. Some remain hidden forever, erased by time and temperature and the vast indifference of frozen wilderness. But others eventually surface, emerging from permafrost when the world is finally ready to hear them. Dmitry Volkov waited 71 years to come home, 71 years for his daughter to read his final words, 71 years for the truth to replace the comfortable lie. The ice preserved him perfectly, his skeleton, his bunker, his story, until oil workers broke through and gave him back to the world. And now, in that preserved bunker where photographs still hang on frozen walls, where a leather jacket still sways in the ventilation currents, visitors stand in silence and remember. They remember a pilot who survived the impossible, a man who died alone but refused to be forgotten, and the stories the Arctic keeps frozen until it's ready to tell them. This video was intense, but this video on the right-hand side is even more insane.